Welcome to the Highlights Show. I'm Phil Kessler.
And I'm Amy Ryan. It's great to be here.
Phew. Okay, my mind is kind of blown right now. Like, we literally just closed the window on that webinar and I am still processing it.
Oh, absolutely. It was an incredibly dense hour.
So dense. And if you're sitting here with us right now, just hanging out, you need to know that we just finished watching this. Well, it was the International Women's Day Rotary panel.
Right. The gift to gain session.
Yeah, exactly. Gift to gain. And the reason I'm kind of exhaling so hard is because going into it, I really thought I knew what the conversation was going to be.
Because usually these things are pretty predictable, right?
Totally. Like, giving is almost always framed as this super strict linear transaction. You know, I give you money or I volunteer my time and you, the recipient, just receive it.
It's just input and output.
Right. And the giver and the receiver are in these two totally separate fixed boxes.
Which inherently creates this massive power dynamic. The donor has all the capital, the resources, the decision-making power.
And the recipient is just supposed to be grateful. Like, thanks for the intervention that just fell out of the sky.
Exactly. But what they did in this panel was completely dismantle that idea.
Completely flipped the script.
They shifted the whole framework from transactional giving to transformational giving, which is it's the idea that true giving actually creates reciprocal gains.
Yes, it's a closed loop.
You're not just handing over a check. You're building an ecosystem where, local leaders are trained, the community scales the solution themselves, and the person giving actually gains a stronger, more resilient society in return.
And if you've ever felt like community service is just, putting Band-Aids on these massive systemic problems, this conversation we just heard completely flips that on its head.
What struck me most, honestly, was the architecture of the session itself. Because on the surface, the agenda looked really disjointed.
Oh, totally. It felt like 4 different conferences mashed into one.
Right. We were analyzing peace-building strategies and then suddenly pivoting to local mental health interventions, then jumping into global supply chain economics and finishing with, environmental engineering in Southeast Asia.
It was a roller coaster. But by the time they wrapped up, it clicked.
It all snapped into place. These aren't separate fields of study. They're overlapping interdependent layers of just one single community ecosystem.
I'm so glad you brought up the structure, because I really want to break down the specific mechanics they discussed. Because, you can't build a functional economic ecosystem on a cracked foundation.
No, you really can't.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with what I'm calling the invisible infrastructure.
The mental health segment.
Yeah. The panelists made this direct, explicit link between global peace building and local individual mental well-being. And I have to admit, when she first said it, I was kind of skeptical.
It sounds like a stretch at first glance.
It really does.
Yeah.
Like, how does teaching a middle school counselor to recognize anxiety prevent a literal community conflict 10 years down the line? It just felt like a massive leap to me.
What's fascinating here is that it actually makes perfect sense when you look at the root causes of societal fracture. We're so conditioned to think of peace building as this huge geopolitical exercise.
Right, like diplomats at the UN drawing borders and signing treaties.
Exactly. But she was pulling the camera way, way back to the ground level. A treaty doesn't mean anything if the individuals living within those borders don't have the psychological tools to manage conflict.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Unaddressed trauma doesn't just evaporate, it cascades. If a community is operating in a constant state of fear or hyperarousal, the smallest interpersonal conflict can escalate into outright violence.
Okay, so how do they actually intervene, though? Because talking about creating safe spaces and all that can sound a bit, hollow if there isn't a mechanical process behind it.
Right, it can sound very buzzword heavy.
Exactly. But what really caught my attention was their focus on training school counselors in mental health first aid. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I'm assuming it's not just asking kids how they feel today.
No, mental health first aid is a very specific tactical skill set. It's an intervention protocol.
Okay.
So let's say a student suddenly becomes highly aggressive in class, or their grades just plummet entirely out of nowhere.
Which happens all the time.
Right. A traditional disciplinary system treats that as defiance. The student gets a detention, the behavior compounds, and the student gets totally alienated.
They just get punished for the symptom.
Exactly. But mental health first aid trains the educator to recognize that sudden aggression is often a physiological response to trauma. It gives the counselor the exact linguistic and behavioral tools to de-escalate the student's nervous system right in that critical moment.
I'm trying to find an analogy for this because it really changes how we view school funding entirely.
How so?
Well, think about fire drills, right? We treat physical safety like fire extinguishers, defibrillators, earthquake protocols as mandatory infrastructure in schools.
Yeah, you legally have to have them.
Right. But we treat emotional and mental first aid like it's some luxury add-on. Like it's a nice bonus feature if the PTA happens to raise enough money that year.
That's a highly accurate way to look at it. We just have a severe cultural bias toward the visible. A fire in a cafeteria is an undeniable threat.
You can't ignore a fire.
Right. But psychological trauma is largely invisible until it reaches a boiling point that forces the community to react.
That is such a good point. And the panelists mentioned creating youth peace ambassadors out of this program too. So it's not just the adults managing the kids.
Right. It's peer-to-peer.
Yeah, you're giving teenagers the actual vocabulary to de-escalate their own internal conflicts, which then scales out to how they mediate disputes with their friends, and eventually how they lead their communities.
It's an early warning diagnostic system for the entire neighborhood.
And that loops perfectly back to the gift-to-gain concept. The initial gift is the training protocol. The long-term reciprocal gain is an entire generation of local leaders who are emotionally regulated.
And this is but emotional regulation has a ceiling if it isn't paired with structural stability.
Which is exactly why the panel pivoted to economics.
It was a brilliant transition.
Because you can give a community all the conflict resolution tools in the world, but if those kids graduate into an environment with zero economic opportunity, that stability is going to fracture.
People still need to survive. They need a functional economic engine.
So this brings us to that social enterprise segment, specifically the Earth-Air model, which I am honestly still processing.
It was incredibly rigorous.
Yeah. The founder brought this intense global finance perspective to grassroots social impact. We're talking about empowering marginalized makers, including human trafficking survivors.
And notice how they are empowering them, not through a temporary grant, not through philanthropy, but through sustainable market access backed by B Corp and fair trade certifications.
I actually want to pause on those certifications.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, but we hear terms like B Corp and fair trade thrown around on coffee bags and marketing materials all the time.
Oh, everywhere. It's on every tote bag.
Right. So it's really easy to just dismiss them as these fancy badges that companies buy to look good. What does it actually take for an organization to get those credentials, and why does it even matter to a trafficking survivor in Southeast Asia?
It matters because it is an intensely rigorous auditing process. It's not just a sticker. Yeah. To become a certified B Corp, an organization has to open up its entire operational machinery to independent third-party scrutiny.
Like a full financial audit.
Yes, but beyond that, we're talking about auditing their carbon footprint, their waste management, their corporate governance, and fundamentally, their pay scales.
Oh.
And fair trade certification mechanically ensures that the baseline price a buyer pays actually covers the cost of sustainable production and provides a true living wage to the creator.
So it literally prevents the exploitation of vulnerable labor.
Exactly. When an enterprise secures those certifications, it's a verifiable trust signal to global corporate buyers. It proves the supply chain is ethical and clean.
And that changes the entire trajectory for the artisan. Because, well, think about the traditional charity model. It is so fragile.
Highly fragile.
Right. An NGO comes into a village, teaches a vulnerable group a craft like weaving or whatever, and they buy the first batch of products out of goodwill.
Maybe sell them at a local fundraiser.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens 6 months later? The charity money runs out, the local market is completely saturated, and the artisans have a skill, but absolutely zero buyers. They're right back where they started.
The social enterprise model flips that completely. It builds the pipeline to the global market first. It treats these marginalized artisans not as charity cases to be pitied, but as vital professional suppliers.
Professional suppliers in a legitimate global supply chain. That's so powerful. But here's where it gets really interesting, and I'd love to hear your take on this. She heavily emphasized this 1% procurement pledge.
Yes, the 1% pledge.
The concept that massive corporations should commit just 1% of their procurement budgets to buying from social enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
Is that actually a transformative economic mechanism? Or is a 1% pledge just like a super cheap way for a Fortune 500 company to buy a clear conscience?
You mean cause watching?
Yeah, cause washing.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we bought our office coffee from a fair trade source, so please ignore the terrible labor practices in the other 99% of our supply chain.
It's a very valid skepticism, and cause washing is a massive issue. But let's actually look at the mathematics of corporate procurement versus corporate philanthropy.
Okay, lay it on me.
A major corporation might have a philanthropy budget of, say, $2 million. That sounds significant to most people.
Sure, $2 million is a lot of money.
But their procurement budget, the money they spend every single year on raw materials, office supplies, catering, software, corporate gifting, could easily be $2 billion.
Oh, wow.
Right. When you put the numbers next to each other, it's a completely different scale.
Right.
1% of a $2 billion operating expense is $20 million.
That's 10 times their entire philanthropic budget.
Exactly. By shifting just a fraction of their normal mandatory business expenses toward social enterprises, they are injecting massive capital directly into the hands of marginalized communities.
And they were going to spend that money anyway. They need the office supplies.
Exactly. And beyond the math, it fundamentally shifts that power dynamic we talked about at the beginning.
Because they're a client, not a donor.
Yes. When a corporation gives a grant, they are a donor holding the power of the purse. The recipient has to constantly prove they are worthy of the charity. But when a corporation buys a product through procurement, they are a client. And the artisan is a vendor.
That is massive. A vendor has leverage. A vendor has professional dignity. They're providing a service that the corporation actually needs to function.
It replaces conditional, temporary relief with durable, earned income. It creates an economic engine that runs on its own fuel.
So these NGOs can actually sustain themselves long-term without constantly begging for grants.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've mapped out the invisible infrastructure of mental health and the systemic machinery of global economics. And then the panel took us out of the theoretical and into the hyper-local physical world.
The environmental engineering segment.
Yes. And I am still buzzing about the ground-level practicality of the projects they showcased, specifically in those remote parts of Indonesia.
Sumba.
Yeah, Sumba. Let's talk about the portable toilets, because my favorite detail of the entire hour was how they handled sanitation.
It was a masterclass in behavioral psychology, honestly.
It really was. Because, okay, so imagine a charity drops off these high-tech toilets in a village that doesn't have running water.
They become broken biohazards within a month.
Exactly. But this project did something that seemed entirely counterintuitive at first. They provided portable toilets for these water-scarce areas, but they engineered the system so that the local families actually have to fetch and bring their own water to operate them.
Which sounds backward, right?
Totally. When she first described that, my immediate thought was, wait, why make it harder for the user? Isn't the whole point of charity to make their lives easier?
But if you just drop technology from the sky and walk away, no one takes ownership of it. It belongs to the charity, not the community.
Exactly. The panelists explained that requiring families to physically bring their own water builds instant community responsibility. It's the ultimate skin in the game.
Because you earned it.
Yeah, if you have to walk a mile to carry the water to flush the system, you are going to make absolutely sure that system is maintained properly.
Oh.
You aren't going to let anyone vandalize it or misuse it.
That small design choice forces a complete behavioral shift. It forces the user to understand the operational cost of the sanitation.
They transition from being passive recipients of aid to active participants.
And what was brilliant is how that exact principle of active participation extended to the other environmental projects they highlighted too.
Oh, absolutely. The waste management training centers, the mangrove planting, and the trace boats.
The trace boats were fascinating.
When they brought those up, I actually had to stop and look up how that mechanically works. Because it's not just like a garbage scow that scoops up plastic bags.
No, it's an analytical tool.
Right. A trace boat literally traces the origin of the pollution up the river system. It maps the flow of the debris to identify exactly which local communities or upstream factories are dumping the waste.
So instead of just endlessly scooping trash out of the ocean, which is just treating the symptom,
they use the data to go to the source. They implement targeted education and intervention right where the problem starts.
And that data allows them to make the results highly visible to the public, which is a crucial strategic point.
The visibility aspect is huge.
When they talked about their upcycling initiatives, taking that recycled plastic pulled from the rivers and turning it into public benches, that isn't just a clever way to reduce landfill waste.
Because you literally sit on the bench in the town square and say, wow, this bench used to be the garbage choking our river.
It doubles as education. The physical object becomes a monument to what the community can achieve when it collaborates.
The same applies to the Rotary Educational Park they mentioned.
Exactly. When you put the physical impact right in front of people, it acts as a catalyst. A local government official sees the bench and realizes the public benefit. A university researcher sees the park and wants to study the model.
Everyday citizens just get to enjoy the space.
The physical infrastructure becomes the meeting point for stakeholders who otherwise would literally never interact.
You aren't just managing waste. You're managing public awareness. But, and this brings me to the final major theme of the webinar, which honestly made me smile the most.
The group dynamics.
Yes. Because none of this infrastructure, not the school counselors, not the B Corp supply chains, not the trace boats, none of it builds itself. It all comes down to the human element.
The logistics of actually getting people to show up and do the hard work.
Exactly. During the Q&A segment right near the end, someone asked a very practical question about gender dynamics in volunteering and recruitment.
Right, how do you actually build these local clubs?
And the panelist was so honest about the realities on the ground. She pointed out that when women want to recruit for these projects, their instinct is highly relational.
They build a social network.
Yeah, they say, hey, come over, let's have coffee, let's talk about this mangrove planting initiative.
Yeah.
They build a social community around the work first, and the actual labor flows naturally out of that pre-existing relationship.
It's a network-based approach to organizing. You build the trust, and the trust executes the project.
Totally. But then they noted this hilarious but very real challenge they faced. That come have coffee and chat approach simply does not work for recruiting men into these community clubs.
Not at all.
They actually had to develop entirely different targeted persuasion strategies to get men to show up and stay involved.
And what did those strategies look like mechanically? Because it really speaks volumes about how different demographics approach problem solving.
They had to shift the ask from relational to structural. Instead of saying, come sit with us and discuss our feelings on the environment, they had to frame it around a concrete time-bound problem.
Like a challenge.
Exactly. It was more like, hey, we need 5 people with engineering experience to build this specific water filtration unit by Tuesday. Here are the blueprints. Can you solve this?
That is so telling.
They gave them specific, competitive, structural goals, and that was the hook that got them involved.
I find that fascinating because it really highlights the changing face of grassroots leadership. For decades, the dominant model of corporate and nonprofit organizing was incredibly top-down and hierarchical.
Here's the mission from headquarters. Execute it.
Right. But this entire webinar, the whole ethos of the gift to gain model, naturally thrives in environments where relationship building and local context are prioritized over top-down management.
Because if the whole point is transformational giving, you can't transform a community you don't actually have a relationship with.
Exactly. If you're trying to create a safe space for mental health first aid, or convince an artisan to trust a global market, or get a village to take ownership of a sanitation system, you cannot mandate that from above.
It has to move at the speed of trust.
And trust is built through those relational networks, the bringing a friend model, combined with the project-based structural goals. It suggests that the future of effective community service isn't going to look like a rigid corporate boardroom.
It's going to look like a highly organized, deeply connected social network. I love that phrasing. And it completely validates everything they were saying about why local grassroots groups are so wildly effective.
They already have the trust of the neighborhood.
They just need the operational tools like the mental health training or the B Corp framework or the upcycling tech to scale their impact.
And when you equip a trusted, localized network with proven tools, the scale of what they can achieve is staggering. It completely circumvents the failure of the dropping toilets from the sky approach.
Look, I just glanced at the time, and I realized how long we've been sitting here geeking out over the mechanics of this panel. I need to stop myself.
We could talk about this for hours.
We really could. But if you are listening to us right now, you really, really need to go watch this entire webinar start to finish. We're barely scratching the surface here.
There is so much more in the actual recording.
There are highly specific case studies, a detailed breakdown of the audit process for fair trade, and the actual mechanics of how those river trace boats are funded. It is an incredibly rich conversation.
It serves as a genuine, actionable blueprint for modern community intervention.
It really does. And the panelists didn't just leave everyone hanging with theoretical inspiration either. They gave highly specific next steps.
Right. The local partnerships.
Yeah, if you want to get involved, they talked about partnering with local Rotary clubs or attending these regional public image clinics they have scheduled for early April.
Which sounds super practical.
It is. They even outlined a public image awards program with actual cash prizes to help fund and highlight these exact kinds of community projects. The deadline for that is coming up mid-April, so if you're involved in a local project right now, you should absolutely look into submitting it. Make the work visible.
Before we wrap up this debrief, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. building on that core theme of transformational giving.
Oh, I love a good takeaway.
We've talked a lot today about mental health systems in schools, global supply chains for artisans, and sanitation architecture in remote villages. But bring that lens back to your own neighborhood right now.
Okay.
If the concept of giving is truly reciprocal, if it is fundamentally a gift to gain what is a local hidden problem in your immediate community, where offering your specific professional skill set wouldn't just be an act of charity, but would actually result in a massive structural gain for your own community's resilience.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. What is the invisible infrastructure missing in your own backyard, and how can you help build it? I'm going to be thinking about that all day.
It changes everything when you look at it that way.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting in on this post-webinar debrief with us. Go find the recording, give a whole thing a watch, and let it change how you think about giving. See you next time.